Agnesa,
Mhm.
Eduardo, thank you guys for being here. I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, as we were saying, welcome to the charted, unscripted conversations with CFOs and finance leaders. The goal is actually quite simple for the conversation. We just want to hear what's top of mind for you guys, for finance leaders across a variety of industries, different topics, and just hear from you, right? Like, what is your experience? What have you done? And see if this can help other leaders that are interested in learning from you guys. So appreciate you guys being here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for the invite, Bernardo. Happy to be here.
All right, awesome. Let's start with intros. I'd love to, make sure that the audience gets to hear from both of you, and a little bit about your background, where you are today, and I would love to hear a little bit about your journey to becoming a finance leader. How did that happen for you guys? So, Agnieszka, if we want to start with you, that'd be great.
Sure. I am currently a fractional chief financial officer here in the Boston area, working in the biotech industry. I am currently working with two companies that are both expecting phase two data early next year. So, major catalyst for both of them that's going to really transform the company. So, we're thinking ahead. How do we prepare so that we're best positioned for that? Um, I started my career in the medical device industry with a company called PerkinElmer, a large company, and had the pleasure of working with all their business units, both in the U.S. and Europe. Really enjoyed it, but at some point felt that I needed to go somewhere smaller, and I joined at that time Ironwood Pharmaceuticals that was getting ready to launch its first drug, Linzess. We scaled from 200 to 750 people in
Wow.
about 6 months. So a period of huge growth. Launching a drug obviously was once in a lifetime experience that I really enjoyed and learned a lot from. And a few years after that, I got the unique opportunity to be a founder in the company, which as a finance person, you don't often get that chance. We spun out a group of assets out of Ironwood into a new company called Cyclarian. And not only had I been with these assets from the very beginning, but I was also one of either a lead or a co-lead on every aspect of that company formation, from setting the strategy to picking the name, the employees that were going to come over, raising 175 million, doing the equivalent of an IPO. So really intense and exciting period in my life. And that's when I first became CFO of Cyclarian back in 2019. Since then, we ended up selling those assets to a group of investors. And then I joined a French biotech in the gene therapy space based out of Paris, help them prepare for a potential IPO once their data comes in, and found that I have a real niche or good expertise that supports those kind of companies. And that's what led me to the fractional work that I'm doing now, which I'm really enjoying.
Did you always know that you wanted to be a finance leader? When did that happen for you?
This is a funny story that I always tell people. When I was a kid, my parents owned clothing stores in Albania,
Oh.
and they would come home with their cash, and I would count it and write it down. I was their little accountant. So when I was 10 years old, you would ask my friends what did they want to do when they grow up, and they would say, I want to be a ballerina or something like that. I would say, I want to be a businesswoman. True story. And I guess what businesswoman meant to me was more in like the finance and accounting. So, I think once I got into it, I thought, oh, I don't know, maybe I want to be more on the operations side, but then as I think I advanced in my finance career, I learned that you can be very impactful from the CFO seat. You can be strategic, a right hand to the CEO. And I think I found my calling. So
That's amazing. All right, great. Eduardo, let's go to you. Tell us about yourself and your journey to become a finance leader.
Sure. Hi, Bar. It's gonna be hard to top it up, but I'll try my best. Well, a little bit different from Nessa, my career start. I'm a mechanical engineer, so my first 5 to 7 years started in manufacturing. I was working for a company called, and you're probably familiar with, Carrier Corporation Air Conditioning Company. that established a bunch of manufacturing facilities down in Mexico. I'm born and raised in Mexico. I transitioned to this country about 10 years ago. So my first chapter of my career, even in finance, was in Mexico. The first 5 years working for manufacturing, I quickly realized that I was better at running investment projects, working with the project managers and understanding if the economics of a manufacturing unit, in this case, an air conditioning, pulling the raw materials, transforming that into an air conditioning. It was more exciting than just to see the assembly line or the quality of the products. To me, like seeing the numbers flowing through the line, it was kind of my thing. And I had the fortune that at that time, Carrier Corporation was offering free sponsorship for master's degrees, which to me was kind of the pivot that I used to transition into finance. I did a master in finance, and pair with that, it was an opportunity for me to transition from manufacturing into FP&A back in the days in Carrier Corporation. So stuck around for 5-6 years doing FP&A in manufacturing, and then I had the opportunity to transition to a company called MSCI. That was or is a Morgan Stanley organization, or used to be a Morgan Stanley organization, the spun off, and now it's a publicly traded company. So the company sells data and software to financial institutions, all the way from asset managers, hedge funds, asset owners. So they opened operations in Mexico, and for me it was kind of the great opportunity to transition into financial services, always in the FP&A side of the house. But for me, going from manufacturing and that was my first pivot in life, which I'm going to expand later. But then I transitioned to financial services. So MSCI is an organization, global organization. At that point, probably 1,500 employees across the 3 regions in the world, and selling, again, data and software to financial institutions. The first half of my time or my tenure at MSCI was in Mexico, and then I got the opportunity to be transitioning to New York, which were the headquarters. And obviously, at that point, I was just taking different roles within the corporate finance side of the house. In this transition, obviously, a bunch of changes: manufacturing to financial services, Mexico to US. And then I also had the opportunity to be back in school, and this is where actually we met at MIT Sloan. And I used also that opportunity to transition from corporate into startups. And that's led me where I am today. Also a fractional CFO, working for multiple organizations. One is a medical device company that just raised Series A, a successful round. And right now we're in the commercialization of the first product. It's an FDA-approved product that is going to hopefully be launched across the globe. And other companies that I'm supporting, they go from sport tech, a little bit of health tech. So doing a lot of different startups, and I think similar to your experience on corporate and then going to a smaller early stage organization, I found that way more exciting, not only because you can apply your corporate experience into organizations that need everything, all the foundational setup, but also because I think it's more gratifying to see how the company evolves and grows. And there's a lot of challenges in the way, but once you start hitting the milestones and you start seeing the progression, is what keeps me super excited on coming to these ventures and participating in a kind of a fractional fashion. So that's kind of my road. Pretty bumpy in many different ways.
Did you want to be a businessman growing up?
Yeah, probably in a different fashion. So the story that I tell, similarly to what you explained. So in Mexico, as you know, soccer it's a religion, and everyone plays. But for whatever reason, I never played. I was always in the sidelines. All my friends, they were playing, but I ended up being the organizer of the teams. I was collecting the fees. I was paying the uniforms. I was, always, and I really, really, really enjoy that role, and being part of organizing communities and be part of a making decisions when it goes to like, okay, we're gonna go into League One versus League Two because it's cheaper or because it's more competitive or because you're gonna be exposed to other teams that are,
Yeah.
whatever may be the case. And actually, I reflect myself on that role, and I'm doing it in a different environment. But yeah, that's kind of where I saw myself. Yes, I need to be a businessman.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I want to introduce the topic for today. And again, this is very unscripted. We can go in any direction that we want, but we do want to try to anchor the conversation to this idea of scaling for growth, right? So you both have this really interesting background where you both started at these big companies and you've run teams for those big companies and then you transition to the smaller, scrappy finance teams. Like it's completely different experience. So I think for people hearing about that experience and what it takes to build a team as the company grows, I think would be really important. But let me ask a question to just get us started, which is looking back and thinking about both the big and the small, which of the two do you think taught you more? So I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. And yeah, so maybe we can start with you. Just looking back, they're very different experiences. Which one do you think has taught you more?
Absolutely very different. And I think working for a big company has taught me just as much about what not to do that it has about what to do, right? Um, Certainly, I think being in a established organization, what it taught me, the number one thing was that you always have to keep refreshing, keep looking at how you can get to that, keep growing, get more efficient. That was the mindset. And the reason why I think I left that environment because I found that in smaller companies there's just so much more of those opportunities to have a real impact. But even within a larger organization, you want to make sure you're running as smoothly as possible, and then keeping your mind open and focused on the improvements. And I think that's certainly something that translates to both big and small. But I found that in smaller organization, just the opportunities to have an impact are much greater.
Yeah. So if I understood the first part of what you said, are you referring to, as a big company, you saw this very ingrained way of thinking in which they were always thinking about how to get better? Like, what are new things that are out there? Like, let's just not settle for we're a big company, we have the resources, we have a big team. Like, how else can we improve? Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. At MIT, we talked a lot about the Blockbuster
Yep.
case, right? And how Blockbuster
Yeah.
lost their position and their edge with Netflix because it's easy, I think, as an established player to get complacent, right?
Yeah.
And I think in order to not lose that edge, you have to stay competitive. You have to be thinking about what's coming at you.
It's almost like make yourself uncomfortable, right? And
Yes.
and I think at a big company, it's probably something you need to purposefully
Yeah,
look
force
for,
it.
force it, and maybe at a small company, you're
Yeah.
already uncomfortable.
Yes.
So it sort
Very
of
well said.
forces.
You have no choice.
Yeah, you have no
Small company,
choice.
right? So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. What about you, Eduardo?
Yeah, I mean, just echoing the first part of what Agnes has said, but I would probably add the fact that incorporate learning the structural political aspect of navigating the complexities of communication, delivering information, managing up and down. It's obviously more relevant than in an organization that's smaller teams, faster decision making, blah blah blah. So I think that part in corporate is it's you're forced to learn it,
Right.
because in the end you're going to be reporting to multiple layers or working with multiple regions in multiple time zones, so which requires for you to have that openness. And
How is that most helpful at a small company? Because when you and we'll get into this
sure.
a little bit later, but when you're at a small company, there's not that many layers. So do you think the first thing that came to mind as you're saying that is, I wonder if that's super helpful coming from a big company as you grow, right? And you start to add layers, you understand the dynamics between all the different people that you're hiring and the roles and how to make sure you're getting the right person and that they're working effectively. But I don't know if that's sort of like an example that you saw.
Yeah, I think the translation would be more, well, first and foremost, I think you need to unlearn a bit when you're going.
Oh, we'll get into that. Yes.
So we're gonna get into the unlearning, because obviously, when making decisions on or when pulling the trigger on a specific investment,
Yeah.
you got to be faster. You need to kind of lean into the 80-20 rule. You just got to go on a small company, while in corporate, there's multiple approval processes before getting to the finish line. Got to go all the way to the sky and then be back. So I think that the own learning on how to be more pragmatic when you're in a smaller organization and forget about the multi-layer approach, it's the part that is tricky because again, it's on learning. But I think the part that translates to me is just the discipline that corporate has in terms of, again, a decision making, an investment that has to be assessed. That discipline, I think, is applicable in both um, corporate and small organization. Obviously, again, probably different or lower, smaller layers. But in the end, you gotta have that rigid when making, especially for us as a finance professionals, looking at a decision from a financial standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a return standpoint, that continues to be the same. Again, corporate, you can add multiple layers. It can take a little bit longer, but small organization is faster, but the same rigid.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree more with your point about the discipline that you learn in a big company. This is a mistake that I made actually when I went to a smaller company. I assumed that we all knew what we were talking because it's a small team, right? Like we're all working on the same thing. So oftentimes when I would go and present a potential solution or a proposal, I would sort of skip the background slides that maybe would be necessary in a larger organization. And I learned pretty quickly that there's real value to getting everyone sort of on the same
Yeah.
page.
Telling the full story,
the full
giving people the background,
Exactly.
aligning on terminology, right? Like
Yeah,
sometimes that can
in a
be a
small
thing.
company, we all know what we're talking about, but we know it from different angles, right? Like we don't have the full story. So I think bringing that discipline of that storytelling, getting everyone to the same baseline starting points before you jump into the solution is really important. And again, something that I learned by by experience, as I made that
Speaking of
transition.
problem solving, I wanted to ask you guys if we can do a little bit of a experience share. So, you came from big companies and now let's, kind of think about when you started at a small company, kind of similar to what you're saying, Agnesa. You walking day one, it's a small company, it's new for you, and you see maybe chaos, a little bit of a mess, right? Like things that need fixing. I'd love to hear a little bit of like, take us to that day and time when you walked in, first day in the job, and you're like, okay, we have a problem and we got to work on this. So maybe Eduardo, something that you can think about that could be just like a good reflection to share.
Well, I gotta start with Stavi. I think Stavi, when I joined, I was the first finance member of the team, so nothing really to uh,
To fix
assess
yet.
to fix yet. I mean, yeah, in the organization terms, but not from a
Yeah.
finance organization. But I think the being the first member of the finance organization obviously has a lot of responsibilities and a lot of they look at you, you know everything and you should know everything and you should know taxes, you should know accounting, and you should know FP&A in one person the same time, and being able to answer every single question that we have across the board. But I think the one thing that I did as I was uh, getting into an early stage organization and kind of on learning all the noise that I learned at corporate, it was just kind of going around the room and understanding what are the real needs in the company. Because some are where we have money, we need people. Do you really need people? Or is it because we have money that you need people? So asking a bunch of questions across the board while building relationships with the existing leadership team to me was key to really start then developing the finance organization.
Yeah.
Before even making any decision if the controller is going to be the first hire or the FP&A is going to be the first hire, it was for me to really understand if the real needs in the company are financial driven or are more operational driven or is a combination. So for me to be able to make fast decision on where we were at that point.
Do you
So
feel like at a big company that behavior was a little bit different in terms of people already knew that if they came to finance asking for a resource, they needed to have a case?
oh yeah, no, completely different.
Okay. So the behavior was different in terms of like all the departments around you.
Yeah, because in the end, and I don't know I would love to hear your experience, but in a smaller organization, money on the table, leaner team, everything is needed. Everything is needed today, not tomorrow or yesterday. And I think whoever screams the loudest, whoever is going to get what they need, as opposed to incorporate, there's already an established process, a path that you need to
People know what the
follow,
process is, they follow it.
even is that a quarterly basis or on a monthly basis, an investment committee. There's a bunch of
Right.
rules that you need to follow before request on something, whatever that might be. But the most important part, you said it, is justify why you need it.
Yeah.
And is there's a return associated, or there's a saving, or there's a synergy, whatever may be the efficiency you will get with that decision you're about to make. And in when you're running at a fast pace, it's like I'm just covering holes. I just want to go, go, go. I know that I need a marketing person in this area. So do you really need that? Can you do it, using existing technologies? So again, asking all those questions in a smaller organization was key for me to really get into what was my new world. And one example that I like to make, it was the traveling part on smaller organization versus corporate. Corporate, we have a bunch of different rules. You have, a pre-established per diem that you can spend on a daily basis, like crazy, crazy policies as you can imagine. And when you go to smaller, you'll think that, okay, that will be easy to implement because, we're like 10 or 15 or whatever the number of full-time employees we were at that point. No, on the flip side, no, we want to travel with no limits. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but layering those policies were way more complex to implement in a smaller organization than in a larger organization, which again, that speaks to the behaviors of the whole company already follow rules and follow a mentality. You mentioned a little bit of the mentality of the company. While in smaller organization, everyone is trying to establish that mentality. Are we going to be pragmatic? Are we going to be really, really tight on these particular areas versus loose in these particular areas? Every company takes different approaches. So it's kind of my experience with
Yeah.
T&E expenses. And I have scary stories to tell you, but yeah.
Well, it's a fine line to walk, I'm assuming, because you're coming into a small company. There's not a ton of structure, not a ton of policies and procedures in place. So you need to be a bit of a bad cop, but you also need to be an ally to all these other leaders from these other departments. So you need to be able to like really carefully walk that line, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Before I answer your question, I think this idea of bad cop is a sore point for me within finance because oftentimes finance ends up being seen as the police.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's absolutely not the right way to operate a finance function. Finance should really be there to facilitate
Yeah.
us meeting the goals of the company, right? So I think my primary goal in the smaller companies has been to absolutely shift that mentality from the police to a facilitator. And one significant example in my career was when we launched Cyclarian as a company. It was a spin out from Ironwood. We announced that we were going to do the spin out, and we had 9 months to launch as a publicly traded company. So there was a deadline, and we had to go from 0 to publicly traded in 9 months,
Wow. Oh boy.
which was quite a challenge, as you can imagine. And we knew that since it had to be so rushed, we were going to make some choices that we knew we were going to have to change later. So we went into it with that mentality. But I would say number one for me, just echoing what Eduardo was saying, was the team, because I think having the right people in the job is even more important than anything else that you can do, right? So having folks with the right mentality that are going to be able to shift and adjust and not be so set in their ways was number one. And that was my first job, right, was to attract the right team. Now I had a pool of people that I was picking from at Ironwood, the bigger company. But for as an example, like the biggest win for me was to convince the controller of Ironwood, the bigger company, to come over to the smaller company and work for me. Now, mind you, when we started, he was more senior than me, right? So, but he did come over, which was amazing. He really made my life a lot easier. And with him came, some amazing talent. I still call it my dream team, because it was really a team of superstars. And as I said, we made choices that we knew we were not regret, but we were going to change later because we had to move fast. But there were some things we had to kind of draw the line. Okay, like what are the things that we're going to port over that we're just going to kind of copy and paste into this new company? And what are the things that we cannot do that with? And for example, our ERP system was one of those. We were using SAP, which honestly was too much for the company we were with, the bigger company. It was going to be way too much for the smaller company that we were building. So we knew that was one place where we had to make a change right away. But there were certain processes and procedures, right, that we said we'll copy over and we'll simplify later. And that's in fact what we did. The first year after launch, we launched as good enough to file our Q1 financials 45 days after we launched as a company. But that following year, it was a lot of iteration and a lot of changes and often downsizing, right?
Yeah.
Getting it right to what we needed as this new, smaller company.
I love what you said about changing the mentality of people seeing finance as a bad cop. So we had a guest before this episode, Chris Sands. He's CFO at Invoice Cloud, and he said something along those lines. He was basically saying, when I talk to all the business leaders or anyone in the company and they say, well, your budget, he's like, no, 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 it's not my budget. Like, this is the budget that we all put together that basically supports the goals of the company. So this is me being a partner with all of you to try to drive this forward, as opposed to like me policing the budget.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think some very effective ways, to do that is to make the entire leadership team part of the decision making, right? So not to have those silos and not to have finance be the adjudicator of who gets the budget and who doesn't.
Right.
The examples I've seen work best is where the leadership team kind of owns everything that happens in a company. And that's a lot easier to do, frankly, in a smaller organization than a very large one. But just picking up on something that Eduardo was saying earlier with headcount requests, I think one way where you can become very effective as the CFO is when you propose headcount ads, right? Versus saying no to things, right? So as in one of the two companies that I'm working with now, when I came in, I really saw a need for a project manager role because it was just going to help everything that we did across the board, and I brought that up as a need and championed hiring someone. And we did. And that PM role is now helping everybody. And as a result, we've been able to deprioritize certain new hires. But that's an example of it's not a given, it's more of a give and take than a black and white thing, right? And I think the budgeting process, I like to think about contingent versus committed spend and not having like clear lines. This is in the budget. This is not in the budget. Having opportunities to come back and revisit as needs of the organization evolve, allowing people to have a venue to surface needs in a structured manner. Those are some of the ways I think I've seen work really well in changing that mentality from policing to partnering.
I can't tell you how much I agree with everything you just said. As a CEO, and this is a big shout out to Joe Alley, our CFO at Charted, he does exactly that all the time. So I can't tell you how many times he's come to me basically saying, "Hey, I think we need people in these couple areas. Like, here's what I'm seeing. Let's have a conversation." And I think that is super helpful for a CEO to have in a CFO.
Oh yeah.
So,
Someone who's close to the business and hopefully works across the organization. It's
yeah.
another set of eyes and ears for you as the CEO, hopefully.
And one of the things that I always use as a hiring criteria, especially for FP&A roles or controllers or whatever finance professional that it's been part of my teams or working with me at some point, is to me building a financial model or do a journal entry and closing the books is kind of the basics. I should be ingrained in any of those individuals that you're hiring. Um, is more the ability to connect with whoever is going to be your internal customer or your internal partner, whatever you want to call it, and being able to create that trust that they're going to pick up the phone and call you when a decision needs to be made. I've been pushing always to my teams to say, when you get to the point that you get a call at 6 or 7 p.m. from one of your internal customer asking you for a recommendation on a decision to be made, you're breaking through that trust that it's needed for a role like yours. And then there's going to be is bi-directional. You're going to be proposing, you're going to be receiving. It's kind of what you were mentioning is you're going to be in that position. You can also offer idea support. You can propose new investments. So to me that's always critical, and I like to always push those individuals to work for me on getting to that mentality. And obviously there's a lot to do as leaders to support them in that process. But again, just learning a financial model, and now with AI, it's kind of the basics. That's the entry level. How you evolve to the next level where you can create those bridges and be part of those decisions in a seamless way.
Do you see that dynamic um, being like happening differently between the small startup and the big corporate organization, or is it similar?
No, I think it's different because in large organization, your role is really is super prescribed. You're within these boundaries, and if you cross the boundary, there's going to be somebody else doing that job, and it's harder to cross the lines. And it's sometimes you need to be smart on how to cross those lines to support and provide more value. While in the smaller, there's no lines. You can just go and get to know the team, get to participate with different leaders in the organization. Actually, the limits are set. You set your own limits. And to the point that, if you want to go one day with R&D or the other day with marketing, go for it. The more relationships you build, the better you're going to be positioned to provide that support.
Yeah.
And the more ideas you will get to see the business, where the business is succeeding, where the business is failing, that's going to give you more ammunition to provide. So yeah, I think to me, that's the difference. But
I will disagree slightly with you in the sense that I think it's equally important in both a big organization and a small organization that partnering is just much harder in a bigger
great way to say
organization.
it. Yes.
Yes, and I've had this experience personally earlier in my career where to like gain that trust and become a trusted partner of a business leader that I was supporting was just a higher mountain to climb, but equally important.
Equally important. Yep. No,
Yeah.
great point. Great way to say it. Yep.
I want to go back to this idea of, again, we're in this conversation of scaling small to big, what it takes to kind of go through that process and building from basically nothing to kind of a bigger, more robust finance organization. So going back to the smaller, leaner side, how lean is too lean, right? Like there's lean good where you feel like you got the right resources, you're not overspending, it feels like we're getting the job done. And then there's, also lean, like things are about to break, right? And it's really challenging. And it's probably difficult to tell, but you as finance, or at least from my perspective, but you as finance leaders, how do you tell the difference? Whoever wants to go.
Well, I think that let me start by one of the clear signals you get when you're too lean and you're about to break, it's obviously going to come from the people you work with, especially at this point, the shareholders, the leadership team. You can get as many information as possible on those areas that they can see that you're probably not seeing because you're on the leaner side, you're, heads down trying to work on whatever is needed. But they can see, especially again, if there's a good partnership with the leadership team, they can tell you, you know what, I think these particular function that you should be performing, you're falling short, or you're about to start falling short, and we need more speed, or we need to be more robust, or whatever may be the case. So I think trusting those links that you create early in when you're joining these smaller organizations will give you those signals. And you gotta be able to and willing to listen and willing to receive that constructive feedback, because in the end you wanted to be able to start making those adjustments in those areas that are about to break. um, I think to me that's one area that I always pay a lot of attention, and I always question those leaders, on a monthly basis or whatever weekly cadence you have with them. What are the areas that you see we can improve? What are the areas where you see that there's weaknesses in the finance organization? Is there anything that you would like to get in a different way? Is there any report that you want to get faster? You can frame it in many different ways to, again, capture that information that then you need to react or to proactively adjust.
Mhm.
Any, I don't know. That's kind of my way to.
I was going to just follow up on that
Sure.
thought, because I think what you're saying, Eduardo, is the best way to gauge when a team is lean not good as opposed to lean good is just staying connected with the organization and get that feedback. But then also, like, stay connected with the actual team and just make sure that you start to pick up on signals that tell you that there's a problem. But what's an example of a signal? Like, what does that look like in practice?
So let's go to forecasting, probably the easiest example to share. So forecasting in a smaller organization, it has to be probably more dynamic. It has to be more frequent because there's a lot of pivots. There's a lot of things that are changing at once. So when you get to the point that the information you're providing to the different leaders in the organization that is getting produced by the finance organization is lagging for where the business is, there's a lag, and they will tell you, oh, this information is already outdated because now I'm working with these new customers or these new shareholders or whatever may be the case. You start picking up those signals. What am I doing wrong that I'm now creating a lag
Got it.
between the information I'm providing and the information that is getting consumed or is needed to keep running the business. So to me, that's a clear signal that we need to go back into a drawing board and see where the lag is created. Is it because we're overloaded with a bunch of other processes,
Right.
or we need to start changing and dropping some things that are not creating value, or again,
Be tech stack, right? Like, we need something.
or new systems or whatever may be the case, but that's a clear signal that there's something missing and is about to break.
Yeah.
And picking up on that, I think for me, the number one thing is, are we focused on the right things? Because I see teams working very hard, spinning their wheels on things that add very very small value, right? But then don't have time to do the really big value creating things. And sometimes that's because we're more comfortable doing certain things versus others. Sometimes it's just the lack of clarity and communication on what is the strategy and where are we going and what is the board looking for, what is the CEO looking for, right? So first thing is focusing on, okay, what are the top priorities here and what are the best, most efficient ways to get there. Forget the capabilities that we currently have today, the systems, the limitations. Let's just think about what we need and how do we get there in the most lean and efficient way possible. And can we reallocate resources
Yeah.
off the things that create less value to the things that create more value? Once you've done that and you feel like you've done it well and you're still not delivering, to me, that is a clear signal that you need to add capabilities.
Yeah.
And what that could be more people, systems, processes, consultants, right? I think that's often also an important question to ask is what kind of scaling do we need to do right now? If it's, one thing that I hear often recently is we don't have any backup. If this person goes on vacation or if this person gets hit by a bus, what happens? But that doesn't mean another full-time person, right? That's not how you build resiliency in an organization. You cross-train, you hire consultants that can step in, right? But there are very other examples where, you need a person like the PM project management skills that I was talking about earlier. That's someone who will know the organization in and out. You cannot outsource that, right?
Yeah.
So being very strategic about where you add and how and what, right? Asking all those questions.
That's such a great point because one of the things that happens in early stage companies is this idea of, again, you're operating lean, but you're trying to grow at the same time. So there's this balance of like how much do we build now for the future versus fix the things that are not working, and all of that happens as the company is trying to grow. What's an example of something that you guys are proud of, and try to get specific if you can, something that you built early on in one of your experiences as a leader of a smaller company that really paid off? Or you can do the inverse, right? Like maybe something where like you over engineered something and then you had to sort of untangle that after because it didn't really work or maybe cause more harm.
And I'll go back to the example I gave earlier when we spun out Cyclarian. We knew we over-engineered a bit, so we knew that from the start. And we knew we had to simplify. Some of that is in the overhead, right? Like the approval processes that you have in a 700-person company are not the same that you have in a 100-person company or a 40-person company. I mean, you're talking about very different scale. So uh, really, this is a different question than you asked, but one of the big mistakes that I see in smaller companies is over engineering on the systems front
Mm.
before you have actually figured out what your processes are. I mean, I'll use budgeting as
Yeah.
a easy example
My
there,
example,
right?
yes.
Uh, I've seen it so many times where I'll come in and either a system would already be in place or being implemented as we speak, where I've had to say, okay, let's pause, let's take a step back, let's think about how we want to budget, what is the story we're telling, what is the problem we're solving. And when you're done with that, whatever you designed before is usually doesn't match. It's not the same thing. So then you have to re-implement, or you realize Excel is good enough in some cases, right? So um, I think really asking yourself, like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What is the easiest way to do that? And
Yeah.
not really thinking about it. Okay, what system do I pick and how is that going to solve my problem? It's just a different way of getting at it.
Yeah.
When I think when you start with the systems, it often leads to the wrong result, and you have to then undo it, I think, as you mature your process.
For that example, Agnieszka, are you talking about over engineering just from a systems perspective in terms of like we need this FP&A tool that we need to buy, and it's just more complicated, it takes more time, you got to set it up, you got to maintain it? Or are you also talking about how are we budgeting, right? And like what is that layout of the budget and like the actual unit economics of the budget? Like what does that look like, or is it both?
Both. It could be both. And I think this brings me to another like big issue that I see, right? Is leadership teams and boards often investing in systems before investing in teams.
Mhm.
Because I've seen it many times in my career where in preparation for some catalyst, whether it was commercial scale up or getting to the next phase of development, where the existing team that really doesn't have any experience in that next phase of whatever the company's future looks like tries to implement systems and processes, and because they don't know necessarily themselves how to scale up,
Exactly.
they rely on the consultants, putting the system in place to tell them what is best practice.
Yes.
But what is best practice at SoftBank is not best practice at the early stage biotech. It's not best practice at a Stavi, right? So, and a lot of times those consultants work with different size companies. So I think really taking the time to think about what we are trying to do, what are the questions we are trying to answer before you then think about how you build the infrastructure to support that.
Yeah.
And I'll use the French company biotech I was working with prior to my current roles. They were in the middle of a system implementation that we halted. We completely revamped the budgeting process. Frankly, Excel would have been just fine because it wasn't that complex, but because we were in the middle of it, we got to a point where we said, you know what, actually moving forward with this system will make it so much quicker and will make reporting actuals versus budget much easier. And it was a modest investment, so we decided to go forward with it at a certain point when our process matured. But I just see it being done the opposite way.
It's such a good point, and I do want to hear your thoughts, Eduardo. But you just hit on so many points that we see at Charted all the time because we provide software, right, that
Right.
automates processes. And one of the things that happens all the time, and this is just maybe a small slice of what you're talking about, but we see it all the time where people say, okay, we want to implement this AP automation tool. It sounds great because it's going to save us so much time. And then once we get to implementation, we start laying out something like who needs to approve? What does that look like for the organization? People start just spinning in circles, right? And like that for smaller companies, they don't know yet and they need to figure it out. And that can really delay things. And we've seen some of the projects like just get delayed for months because people are like in this state of flux where like they're trying to figure it out and the processes are not really set.
Right. And my thinking is, try to piece it together just like, we learned at MIT when you're doing you have a new idea on a new company, right? You do a minimum viable product. Sometimes you mimic what you're going to do in this, the system is going to do, right? But you have someone answering the call in the back or something like that, right? Same idea here. Like try to hold it together with Excel or whatever tools you have until you've kind of worked out some of those kinks in the system.
We also see people on the NetSuite side that they really want to jump into a NetSuite implementation. And for example, one of the things that it's not necessarily a red flag, but when someone comes to us and they say, we want to implement NetSuite and there's no controller in place, that to us is a reason to ask more questions, right? Just to make sure that they're ready for, that next step. So it's just something interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, similar, and we probably face the same situation with the budgeting system. We actually some of the things that I'm proud of at Stadia was that the operating expenses model that we built for forecasting, fantastic, phenomenal in Excel. In Excel.
There's nothing wrong with that.
What try to transition into a FP&A tool, it was a completely missed because I think that question on are we aligning with the company's priorities? Are we solving the right problem? Do we need to keep pushing on automation in this particular process? Or there's other processes that we need to fix before getting into this, or just establishing the process, the concept of budget and are we going to scale it if we go into a more sophisticated tool. We missed some of those steps and we had to go back and say, no more FP&A tool. We pay 1 year, we stopped that, and we ended up sticking with Excel for whatever number of years we were using. And I was proud of it because it was a robust model that allows us to, keep the business going. But I'm 100% with you on the fact that many small organizations tend to lean on the tech stack heavily without looking at the house and cleaning the house first. And I think the question and the challenge we're going to have more and more is that with the AI revolution now is kind of a given. I'm expecting for you to use AI tools to make your team leaner and run faster. So it's going to be kind of a trade-off, and probably going back to the basics and asking those questions, because investors are going to be expecting that CFOs or any department, any function, to use all those new AI tools to accelerate or to be faster to whatever, get to the next milestone, because that's what the world is suggesting.
Yeah.
So
What are examples that you guys are seeing? Because there's no doubt we're going through like a very transformational time right now with AI. And going back to this idea of like scrappy, maybe we use Excel. Now there's AI on top of all of that,
Yep.
right? So there's this capability for anyone in the organization, if there's the right connectors and things, to ask questions to AI about data. And data can be financial data, it can be budget data. There's all these tools that people can use. So what are things that you guys are seeing today that maybe are starting to shift the dynamic and manifest some of the things that you're saying?
I think the fact that data accessibility is now for everybody creates a little bit of misinformation, which is kind of counterintuitive, because once you get the data in your hands, you can run with it. But sometimes you need the context. You need to go back to the business, ensure that the data is the right data, and ensuring that the data is structured the way that should be structured for then you to get the output that you're expecting. So a lot of the things that we're trying to do when rolling out these new tools is to ensure that it has to be human oversight, regardless of how easy you can get a financial report or a business report. You got to go back, spend the right time in looking at whatever you're trying to convey on that report, because yes, you can produce it in a fraction of the time that you were producing it before, but a lot of these data, again, you need to start getting into the nitty gritty to ensure that that is going to land whatever you wanted to land. So um, that's where I think we're kind of trying to play the game. Yes, we love those tools. Yes, we're being now pushed on using a lot of these tools, but we also have a responsibility as a finance professionals to ensure that any data you're extracting from those systems is going to be accurate, it's going to be timely, is going to be telling the story you wanted to tell.
So one question that I had for both of you, and I wanted to ask you, and I think you just answered that question, was, do you trust AI? And I think what you're saying is no. So it's almost like this duality of you know and expect that you and your team, they're going to embrace AI, but in terms of trusting AI, you're not there. I think that's what I'm hearing.
I'm probably 80/20. So 80, you can produce it, you can accelerate it, you can automate it. Yes, I love that. And I love the look and feel. I love the granularity of the information that it comes out from all these tools. But I am always, even if you're doing it manually, you always need to have that QA part within the process.
Verification.
Just verification, checks and balances, ensuring that especially if it goes to the board or goes to the leadership team, what are you trying to convey? What are we solving for? You mentioned that before. Is this information you created now a 15-page report? Is this really hitting what needs to be hitting, or are you just creating a lot of fluff out of an automation or a click tool that you can pull extract a report? So that is where I always push, regardless of AI or not. There has to be checks and balances, QA, that we as a finance professionals got to have in every single process to ensure that information is delivered in the right way.
I am currently working with two companies that are about 20 people each and very, very lean for the stage that they're at. I would say they're both strangely about 50% of what like the comps would say. So when you're such a lean company, it's important that you are able to be strategic and execute at the same time. And that's very hard to do, right? So, where I think that AI can be really helpful is to do some of the time consuming but lower value add work that will then free the rest of us up, right, to do the more strategic thinking and the more um, higher level work. And it's not a question of whether I think we trust AI. I just don't think AI is there yet, right? Like, I think it's evolving very fast and you will probably get more accurate, but it's still hallucinating. It's still giving false information. So I am a champion for both companies to use AI, embrace it like in a serious way. And we're going through that right now. But my number one rule, or whatever you want to call it, is that there is no AI work product. Like, we own our work product. If you're going to send out anything that you used AI, you have to be comfortable in the end, as if you got that data any other way, right? You have to be able to put your stamp of approval on it because you own your work still. And that's easier said than done, right? Because AI just gives you so much more than normally you could do in a certain amount of time. So, do you really have the bandwidth to go and double check everything? But I think at a minimum, I mean, it depends on how critical, what you're sending is, but it
How to
has,
prompt it.
and how to prompt it, but it has to pass, like, you are an expert in your field and you have to feel comfortable with what it's telling you. And if you're not comfortable, you have to prompt it more and keep pushing. Definitely have the sources available to you and double check some of those sources. But the way that I think about AI in general is that it's a great assistant. For me, I think of it as a junior analyst. Of course, if a junior analyst gave me a long range plan or something like that,
I was going to say a junior analyst that knows a lot and praises you a lot. Listen, it has to do that quite.
yeah, both ways, right? Like, they would do both. Um, but I mean, honestly, I wouldn't just trust something that a junior analyst gives me and go show it to the board as fact, right? I would sit with them and ask questions, poke holes, do rounds of back and forth. And I really think of AI the same way, right? And use the same approach that I would with a very junior analyst. But the big difference is that what a junior analyst does in 5 days, AI does in 5 minutes, right? So it's much more effective at that.
Yeah, so this is fascinating, and very curious because one of the things that it's starting to happen, and I feel like we're at the stage where there's a lot of experimenting that's happening just across every company with AI. But we're at the point right now where everyone with a Claude license can build a dashboard that maybe, if Claude connects with NetSuite or with Salesforce, they can basically ask any questions and build a dashboard. So I just wonder if there's going to be this manifestation of how people are working with AI, where you as finance leaders start to see all these people starting to create their own dashboards, not just within finance, but like outside of finance, and coming to you with like, hey, I ran this analysis with Claude and this is what it's telling me. And now you're like, oh God, all right, well, now we need to check all this stuff. Like, I wonder if that is going to be a thing.
I had a little bit of a reverse experience with this where the finance team, let's say, was trying to help the clinical team with the enrollment dashboard and site activation dashboard. And I think I shared this with the finance team directly. They totally missed the mark on the first try. It was not hitting on the right metrics at all. So I jumped in, even though it was not my area at all. I used Claude, fed it the huge spreadsheets that the clinical team had, and had it build a much more concise, easier to digest, focusing on the right points dashboard. But very importantly, I went back to the Clin Ops team and I said, hey, I'm trying to help you with this. Here's something that might be helpful, but you're the experts here. You take it and do what you want with it and present it as you wish, right? I'm not gonna come and
So it's the reverse of everything that I
It's
just
fact, right?
basically.
But I think that's the key,
Yeah,
right? Like it was a tool. I thought I could be helpful, but I ultimately left it with the experts and told them, you double check it and see how it can fit into, and they are using it. They made it their own, so it was helpful. But ultimately it wasn't mine, to keep and present.
The only couple of things that I will add is one, I think there's still some runway. I mean, we like to think that everyone is using it and connecting all the tools, but no, I think that there's more sophisticated, the early adopters that now they're ingraining Claude in every single part of the process. But there's some other functions that are still in early stages, just prompting like basic, what is this, what is that, while other functions are more like, okay, let's bring that data connecting to Salesforce, and there's a little bit of runway, which again, we believe that we all are there, and we're not. I think there's still some. And then the second part, to your question, I think I welcome for people to do their own things, their own dashboards. I think is good for us, for people and other functions to really embrace and get to own their data. I think the way that I see it is we will need to start creating barriers and policies. So for those new developments that are going to come across the organizations, what are the rules and policies we're going to follow? Can you share it externally? Is it for internal usage? Is for, town hall session? So what we are going to put together as an organization to control the flow? Because again, that flow, it's going to continue, and everyone is going to get expert. And at some point, everyone is going to connect all their APIs and tools. How far you can go internally in a professional setup to use that data. And I'm welcome for you to create as many dashboards as you want, but always within this containing policy.
That ties back into what we were talking about in terms of the small company versus the big company, right? So small company, we're all about AI. There's not a ton of controls. And then as you start to grow, you just need those controls and you need additional, layers of management for that. And we're seeing that at Charted. So anything that, as soon as we start to deal with a certain size of company, the security questionnaires, how do we use AI? What happens with the data when we use AI? So I think everyone is eager to get AI into the organizations, but then of course there's the worry part, right? That I think it's more prevalent with bigger organizations, which also makes me wonder, and I wanted to ask you, do you worry about fraud with the rise of AI? Is that a thing that you worry about?
Um, Not necessarily fraud, but I hear this concern about data security a lot. And I have to say, it baffles me a little bit because in the end, it's a question of like, do you trust contracts or not, right? A lot of companies use Microsoft, right? We share our data with them. We trust them. You share your data with Anthropic. Contractually, they're not supposed to share that or have it go anywhere other than where you want it to. So then it becomes a question of, are you not trusting that company and your contract with them? I think this is why it's super important that we have enterprise accounts, company accounts, because when you get into trouble is when individuals are using their personal accounts and then you don't control where your data goes and what happens with it. So I think this is another reason actually for companies to embrace it so that individual employees are not going off in uncontrolled environments doing whatever they're doing, right? It's much better if you have that within your team account.
Interesting enough, I was reading an article yesterday saying that the C suite role that is being churning more is the CISO. Lately, in the last 24 to 36 months, CISO all probably remains in the seat 12 to 18 months. Yeah, it always a turnaround of CISOs because the demands of what it takes to set up a enterprise policy, and there's a lot of figuring out because it's a transformation. We don't know if we're gonna need a higher wall versus a smaller wall, and we know that we cannot use personal account, that we know, but then we view within the enterprise account what's high versus low standards, and there's a lot of, again, figuring out, particularly for CISOs and individuals that are responsible for data security. But um, similarly with companies that are developing new solutions, what was it? Claude ended up stopping one of the models that they created for data security because it was too dangerous. So I think that there's a lot of experimentation. Uh, I think the fraud aspect, back to your question, it's always going to be there. I mean, it's for sure. We're getting into understanding if there's going to be more or less. There's always been part of risk management in any organization. But I think, again, as we transform and get more into this revolution, there's going to be a lot of solutions that are going to come and supersede what is out there. And I think it's going to get back to the risk management.
Yeah.
I don't see it more. I just see it like we just need to keep it top of mind and following policies, establishing policies, implementing policies, following rules. And I think that's going to continue to be the case.
Yeah. And maybe it's also because of the nature of what we do at Charted, which is AP automation, but we're getting way more questions about just fraud detection capabilities, right? People are really concerned about the ability for people to create very realistic invoices that are basically, you can't really tell the difference between a fake and a real one.
Right.
So that's a thing that I think people worry about.
Absolutely. And that's where having good process
AI.
on the other end of that, and not just the AI detection, but you have to have a purchase order that matches that invoice, and you have to have approval from the right people, right? And making sure that you're doing
The banking details
the
are
banking
approved.
details, that you follow good
Yes.
processes, that are just good measures,
Yes.
whether it's AI or not, right?
Yep.
So I think it just means that those other things are just
Yeah.
as more important now than they were before.
Let's talk about people. So people is a topic that it fascinates me, and I want to hear your experience as it relates to, again, scaling, right? Like building from lean, scrappy teams all the way to how bigger finance functions work. I've seen articles out there about playbooks, right? If you're this size, you need this role, and then once you get to this size, you need these couple roles, and then kind of they give you that type of playbook. Do you believe that's how it's done, or is it more nuanced than that? So I'd love to hear sort of your experience as it relates to finding the right talent and hiring at the right time.
This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because I think everything that we do in a team, right? Whether it's the finance team or the broader company. And to that regard, the hires that we make, I think, are the biggest determinator of success, other than in a pharmaceutical and biotech company. The science, of course, and the molecules, have to be there. But the people is the second very important ingredient there. And I think that for me, it really starts with the people when thinking about building a team. In a small company, which is again where I found myself, it's in smaller companies. It's really important to hire jacks of all trade more so than experts in specific fields. And sometimes those jacks of all trades, they are stronger in certain areas than other, right? But I think having that mentality, the open-mindedness, the curiosity to not only want to do more than kind of what they're experts in, but beyond that, taking that in, having that initiative, to go and do it. I think that's really, really important. That's the number one thing I look for. And then once you have those people in your organization, you build around them, right? So if they are experts in one area, then you complement them with other people that are experts in another area or consultants. Um, you build expertise as you need it, right? And some things in a smaller company you need constantly. Other things, like let's say tax advice, you need more sporadically, for example. So you think about bringing people in based on what your needs are. But I'm a strong believer that um, the right individuals can learn and stretch and grow, and that's the number one quality that I look for.
Yeah,
in my
I
team.
totally agree. And that's so helpful to have in a small company. What do you think about
Probably same. I'm a strong believer that talent is going to continue to be a key factor of success in any organization. As opposed to biotech, tech is getting questioned about, how many people you need to build a company. And obviously, as you can see, there are success cases where what was that first unicorn of one individual or two individuals. So there's a lot of questions about, do you really need a R&D organization or whatever function, you name it, to build a unicorn or whatever your destination is in tech. But I strongly believe that we need the talent. We need to be strategic on where and when. But back to your point, and you were mentioning in a different, using probably different words, but I'll say that the roles that we need in this era is they need to be versatile. They need to be able to pick on more, to take on more, sorry, because in the end, it's with all this revolution, the expectation is that leaner organizations are going to be able to do more. So for that reason, the roles and the talent that you're going to hire in the near future, they need to be able to do more. They need to be more versatile. And you're right. I mean, there's going to be areas that, yes, you now can cover more. Some areas you're going to have more expertise. Some areas you're going to be probably leaning into cloud more. Some areas you will need a validation from a consultant or whatever may be the case. But
Claude, the new hire or the AI?
uh,
But isn't that the same thing nowadays?
but I think it's the if you look at from an investor standpoint, again, especially in tech, there's a lot of questioning on when and how. Do you really need a controller? Do you really need the FP&A professional in your team? Can you run all these models in this new AI tool? So that's why, as a CFO, as a finance leaders, we need to create those business cases and show that a versatile and talented individual will be able to not only get the job done, but maximize the type of work that we need in this organization. It's always going to be about proving the value and showing the value, but I strongly believe that we're still going to need a lot of good talent to build great organizations. It's just more the questioning and the proving. It's going to lie on us as a finance leaders to say, this is why we need it today. This is it. This is a return on investment that I'm getting. Probably was happening in the past, but now it's going up in the decision making ladder. Probably.
Yeah.
One thing I'll add is that I think for any CFO to be successful in their role, it's important to have a strong second
Yep,
in command.
100%.
And I think whether that's a controller or a VP of finance or whatever, I think that's less important. But in order to be a strategic partner to the CEO and the leadership team, you cannot also be the person who is worrying about the day-to-day nitty-gritty journal entries, right? You need someone, but that stuff is very important, right? You cannot have fraud. You have to have proper approvals and all the things we talked about. So that's a non-negotiable, but it doesn't have to be you, right?
Yeah.
And I think for the CFO to be strategic, which is what the organization needs, you need someone who has the basics, the core down, who you can trust. Hopefully they can do a lot more than that. But I don't think that, generally speaking, it's a good use of the CFO's time to be very focused on that. And I have been CFO of a publicly traded company where, again, it's a must, right? And it was an important part of what I did, but I don't think it's where I added the most value as CFO. That's where my controller came in, right? And he had it. So.
Would you say that controller was maybe at the top of the list of the best hires that you've ever?
Oh, absolutely. Especially that first controller, because I have accounting background in my history, but I came up through the FP&A business development route. So in my first CFO role, which was a public company CFO, to have an experienced controller was critical to my success, right? One, because it gave me the confidence. Frankly, I learned probably more from him than he did from me. But we complemented each other really well. And I think that is something really important in any team, not just finance, is hire people who complement you, right? Like, we don't want people who think the same, have the same expertise, because then you're just probably missing a lot of things. So, yes, absolutely. That controller, his name is David Slatcher. He's retired now, but shout out to
David.
David.
Uh,
Yeah, he was.
what about you? What's your top of the list best hire that you've made? You can give a shout out. You cannot say names. It's totally up to you. But like, give us a little.
Well, I have some, so that's why I don't want to go through the list. But I like to say when I was in New York, I was running a team half in Mumbai, half in Mexico, and I think the team that I form and I spend more time, to be fair, was a Mexico team, and there were a few of those individuals that to me they continue to be one of the best FP&A analysts that I have had in my journey. Not only because they had the good expertise on creating models and running all the tactical aspects of the role, but they were going above and beyond of what an FP&A analyst, connecting with people, understanding the business, being always on top of not only again the financial aspect, but understanding where the business is heading. So for sure, I will continue to remember those individuals because it's really once you get a stock in an individual and standards, you're always gonna try to either match it or succeed supersede it. But it was a great experience building that team, and it was one of my first teams that I continue to probably call the dream team as you said it before.
All right, you guys have been so generous with your time. I have one closing question for both of you. And the question is, as you reflect about your journey as a finance leader, what is the one piece of advice that you would give other finance leaders? And you can pick any category, any topic, it does not matter.
Oh boy.
But what is the one thing that you'd like to share? So maybe, Agnesa, we'll start with you.
Oh, this is a tough one, because I think it's hard to pick one thing. I think I'll give you two things. How about
Okay.
that? So one, from a more tactical perspective, again, I think we talked a lot about this, really focusing on what does this organization need? Where are we heading? And really tailoring what you do operationally to that versus what can we do, or what is our team's capabilities. So don't let the tail wag the dog, I guess is what I'm saying, and remain focused on what the organization needs, and build for that, adjust to that as that shifts. The second part would be that uh, it's all about storytelling in this in business in general, right? Like, so make sure that you spend time on the story that you're telling all the different stakeholders just as much as like the job that you're doing, because you need the investors, you need the clients, customers, right? The employees, those are all different stakeholders. In our case in biotech, the patients, they're very important stakeholders, and what's important to each of them is different. So really thinking about how do you position the company from all of those perspectives and putting that story together, and then letting that guide you in terms of how you operate and what you do. I think it's really important.
I love that. Thank you. Eduardo.
I love the storytelling part for sure. But I would say, and I want to go back to the police. Uh, I would say that we need to detract that stereotype that exists on a finance organization, a finance professional. We gotta make finance fun again. I think getting the entire organization to understand how finance wants to support the business and get them involved in the decision making and enjoying looking at financial statement. It's a lot, but I think it's something that I will say it's as a finance professional, you need to get your um, individual that is on the other side of the table to really get engaged with what finance means for the organization. And again, if they think that you're the police, remove that noise. That is not being the police, is being your partner in this journey. So I think I will highly recommend for you to, if that's a perception, remove that perception, because once you do that, the world is going to open and changes the dynamic with the leaders, with the employees, with the customers, with the investors. Obviously, there is going to be the same responsibilities and expectations about return, about the financial statements being in the right place. But I think once you navigate in making finance part of the DNA as a core and not as I need to have it and I need to always be there because it's needed, I think it will give you great results.
Very, very well said.
And Eduardo, something you said reminded me. For a while, I was thinking about changing my title in the signature, the Chief Fun Officer.
There you go.
I didn't do it, but after this conversation, maybe, I will.
I love that. Yeah. Well, Eduardo, Agnesa, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Renato. Appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having us.